All right, Ben Thompson is here. He runs the Stratechery newsletter. I said that correctly this time.
You did.
The last time I was like, Stratechery. But you planted your flag very early on Pay to Read My Stuff Island.
I think.
And now there's a lot of people there.
I think I was the first one to do it. I mean, like, there's been paid newsletters for a long time, like on Wall Street and stuff. They like charge $15,000 a year or something like that and get some hedge funds. But to do the sort of pay $10 a year or $10 a month, I should say, now $12 a month, and kind of appeal to way more people, make it up in volume, it was sort of a new thing that has only been possible in the last 7-8 years, thanks to companies like Stripe or whatever, where it makes it easy to accept payments. So I started the pay part in 2014, and it's been going pretty well.
Motley Fool and some of the stock places were doing versions of this, but never for like just information.
That's right. Yeah. And they would be, I think like Grants is like a very famous one. And again, very, very pricey because they're limited to a certain segment. They used to actually mail out like paper printed on things. But this idea of being able to sort of just go to anyone, my main delivery mechanism is email. I mean, I have a website where I put free articles, and the paid ones are there too, but most people read via email. And the great thing about email is it's the one sort of feed people check every day.
True.
That you can get into for free, right? If you want to get into Facebook, you have to pay. If you want to get into, Twitter, where I mean like promoted and make sure they see it, you have to pay. Whereas email, it's open and free. And if people invite you in, it's super awesome. So.
You know what's funny though? I have a 14-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son. No email.
Yeah.
They're just text and Snapchat messages and Instagram messages. And if I email them something, I'm like, you see that thing I sent you? You're like, no, I don't check email.
So what's funny is,
I don't know what's going to happen in that generation.
I thought that too, but my daughter is 12, and it's interesting because they got their computers starting in 6th grade.
Yeah.
And maybe because, I don't know, it's a little bit younger and kids are more worried about it, but they actually email each other all the time because some of the kids don't have phones and some do. And so, but everyone has computers and has email. So they use email. It's so random.
But you live in Taiwan though.
I do. But I mean, there's, just as pervasive, even more pervasive, mobile and chat and things like that. I mean, they now use Instagram a lot more. I think it was more particularly when they first got it. It was sort of a new thing for some of them. But yeah, it's interesting though, because I think there's always a sense that, people actually grow up and they change. And I think there's not really any evidence that email is actually going anywhere. Like Slack was going to kill email. Like, and what actually happened is the company that dominates email is now killing Slack.
Right.
I think email will be with us for a long time. Being open and something that anyone can tap into and anyone can do remains super valuable. No one is going to build a protocol like email ever again. So I think we're going to be with it. It's going to be with us for a long time.
So going from the paid newsletter era to where we are now, where you have pretty much every newspaper now has some sort of subscription thing. You have, the Vox is going to end up doing something, I'm sure, with all of their sites and with New York Magazine. Vanity Fair has their thing. It's very hard to find free, high quality content at this point. When does this start bundling together? When does this start to look like video, where you have Hulu plus Disney plus ESPN plus for this price? When does that start happening with news?
I'm not sure. I mean, because it's not unclear what sort of the forcing mechanism for that's going to be. I mean, Netflix started as a bundle. I mean, I guess Disney is sort of brute forcing it, but they already have so much content that makes it compelling. And the other thing with news in general is news is a very sort of difficult product to compete with because like once news is out there, it's out there. Like there's no sort of locking it down, and its value disintegrates over time very quickly. Whereas Netflix makes a show, and that show is still valuable and a reason to subscribe like several years down the road. So the nature of, I think, text generally and that stuff is different. I do think some of the companies like Vox and BuzzFeed and stuff, so those, I think they are going to make a go of it. I think they'll stay free, but you're right. A lot of especially newspapers and stuff are for pay. The other thing that's hard is you look at someone like me at this point, if you want a bundle to work, the benefit, I need to get more money from people that subscribe, not for me, but for other people to make it worth the money I'm giving up from people that subscribe for me, if that makes sense, right? And so it makes it very hard to get a bundle off the ground because you have to make it worth the while of the people that attract people to the bundle And there's kind of like a valley in between like where you are currently and like the mountain you want to get to. And going through that valley is very, very difficult. So if you think about all the bundles that started, they often started because of technological limitations. So the newspaper is a bundle. And it started because you actually had to have one place to print the paper and put it on a truck and deliver it, right? So that was why it was a bundle. The cable started, this is actually super interesting, because there was remote cities or up in the mountains or whatever that wanted to get broadcast TV. The signal was poor. So they would band together to build a community tower to pull in the signal, then run wires from that tower to all their homes. It was called community access TV. That is where cable came from. What happened was, I think it was actually James Dolan, the smart Dolan came along and started like bundling all these together into one product. And then they realized, wait, we could actually use satellite to go straight to these and avoid the broadcast networks completely. And then HBO came along and TNT were really the first ones. And so then the bundle grew from that. But it started as a collective thing, right? It wasn't like there was an ESPN floating around and a TNT floating around and someone said, let's put these together. Right. No, they started together. And so I actually, because of that, like what's going to actually pull stuff together, actually pulling together rarely happens. It usually starts as a bundle. And then maybe the bundle breaks up sort of over time.
Because I wonder if the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, Boston Globe, Chicago Tribune, whatever, you took like the 6 biggest newspapers and they said, we're all together now. This is going to cost $19.99 a month or whatever. Or you could just get us all separately. But you can get all this together and you get all these things and save something. I actually think that would work.
Right. But it's one of those things, again, where it makes total logical sense. And as a reader, it's very appealing. It's like, why am I paying for all these things? It'd be great if I could read whatever I wanted to. But if you actually sit down as a decision maker at one of these newspapers and be like, okay, us 6 newspapers, will say, are going to get together. That means out of every dollar a subscriber pays, I'm going to get 16.5 cents.
Yeah.
So that means I have to get 6 times the number of subscribers via this scheme that I can just get on my own and keep it all. And so maybe if you're like the Chicago Tribune, you're like, that sounds awesome. I'd love to get the New York Times to get me more subscribers. And the New York Times, like, we have 3-4 million subscribers. Why do we want to share them with everyone else?
They'd probably weight it, right? Like New York Times would get 25% or maybe you pay $40 a month or.
Right. And then you get into these schemes like where cable. How much do you read an actual thing, whatever. But then you're getting into an incentive problem. I think you don't really want to getting in a situation where you're compensating writers based on how many people read it or whatever. Then you're back into like the clickbait era. True. Where you're trying to get people to read. And one of the great things about subscription is you win based on quality. So the incentives are to write really good stuff that people want to read and share and feel compelled they have to read. And so I actually think,
have good reported
that's right,
stuff
exactly.
that you can only get here.
So people are like, people complain about this aspect and justifiably so, but I think they overlook a lot of the really good things about the current system and the fact that your duty as a publication is very explicitly to your readers in a way it actually wasn't for the last 100 years, where the advertisers were the ones that actually paid the bills.
Do you buy the whole the fear that there's a subscription bubble coming where people are just going to look at how many things they're subscribing to and go, wait, what am I doing? I have 22 subscriptions. I should have 7.
Yeah, I mean, I think people, I get this question a lot in particular because...
No, I don't like asking questions that are like generic questions. Well, I thought that was a really good question. I was excited about it.
I mean, I have a lot, because what's going to happen, what happens, there's lots of newsletters out there. The reality is just because it's a good business model doesn't mean it's going to succeed for everyone, right? Like it's still business, right? You have to compete and win. So first and foremost, I don't think that's necessarily a problem for the folks that are already successful. But 2, just because, I think people underestimate the people don't think about the internet the right way. People think about media in terms of the media we've always had, which makes sense because that's their life's experience, which is you have the city newspaper and you have local broadcast TV and then you have cable sort of generally. And if you think back, all of that is defined by geography. The internet the whole point of it is it's not limited by geography at all. And so that's why all these business models got screwed up because they were predicated on something that ceased to exist.
Yeah.
But the implication is now you can build something new by reaching all over the world. So Spreaker has like something like 85 subscribers in 85 different countries or something along those lines.
Really?
And so the what's interesting about that is because there are people that care about a specific angle on technology, which is like the strategy and business model side of tech companies. And so I don't need to worry about getting all the people in Taipei, Taiwan, where I live, or Wisconsin, where I grew up. No, my market's literally the entire world, and I can pick out one person in South Dakota and one person in Florida and one person in Belgium, and you bring that all together and you have a compelling model. And so I think there's lots of opportunities to do this. So there's people that write about just Apple, for example, or there's people that write about music, or people that I think there's a big journalistic opportunity to go into like smaller cities and focus on just a city or just a beat or whatever. And actually, I think it's hugely undertapped. And the scale comes not from lots of people doing the same thing. Like your point about the newspapers, the New York Times and the Washington Post, that are kind of doing the same thing. The actual future is not lots of people competing by doing the same content. It's lots of people competing by all specializing in these niches.
Little tiny satellites.
That's right. And so
like
it's
Buck's Twitter.
Buck's Twitter is an amazing place.
If there was an awesome Bucks person, he would have 9,000 crazy Bucks fans subscribing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I this is something that I think the Athletic's been very smart about is having like there's two beat writers that cover the Bucks. There's the local paper, which is traditionally been very sort of in with the team and not very critical, and now there's someone else that's providing a beat writer that is actually not that has their own point of view and is independent, and that's super valuable. It's something that we're us Bucks Twitter fans are certainly willing to pay for. And I think there's going to be more and more sort of opportunities there.
What do you think of the Athletics model?
I think it's interesting because that's actually a bundle. So, and the reason why I think it works, at least on a theoretical level, is people who like sports usually like lots of sports. And so, whereas, someone who likes technology, for example, is not necessarily going to be interested in a site about, culture, not to choose like a ring or whatever, right? But are not necessarily willing to pay for it. Whereas if I want to read about the Packers, I also probably want to read about the Brewers. I also probably read about the Bucks. And if that's all already in one place, then that's a pretty compelling proposition. And oh, by the way, some big story happened with the Lakers. I want to go read about it. I want to go read about the Warriors, whatever it might be. So I think sports lends itself to a bundle in a way that other platforms necessarily don't. Is that now? Would I join something like The Athletic? Well, no, because I think the great thing about this model is I, as an individual, if I can actually drive subscriptions by myself, the biggest return is to just keep it all for myself.
Right.
But particularly for journalists, so from journalist perspective, who don't necessarily have the capital or ability to go on their own for a year and try to build up an audience, like to be able to join something like that also makes sense. So there's a lot of sort of aligned incentives there. So I think
people have tried that and weren't able to really totally make it work.
Yeah,
in cities like Boston and Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's right. And so I don't know. I would love to know more details about like how successful they were or whatever. But I mean, it's difficult, particularly. I think the opportunity is. I actually sometimes feel like a bad example for this model because I do fairly generalized analysis about a wide range of things. And that's actually really hard to make work. Like there's analysis all over the internet, right? Like why would you want to pay for something in particular? So I actually think the real opportunity will be more journalistic, but covering stuff that no one's covering. And in this case, people, they try to cover like the 76ers or whatever, but there's plenty of people covering the 76ers. So it's very, very competitive. Whereas if you were to go in and cover something more like city government, like which maybe only like 2,000 people care about, well, that's great. Being in a small pond is actually a really great place to be. Yeah. I think so. That's the challenge there. They were in a too big of an ocean probably to survive.
Remember ESPN when they did the Insider, which I think they still have, but when they really started pushing this in the 2004 range. And, they put a lot of their fantasy people behind it. People like Chad Ford were behind it. Eventually some local stuff. And I remember in the end of last decade, it was pretty successful. Like they were telling me some of the numbers in like 08, 09. And it was like 850,000 people or something subscribing. And it was really because they wanted like the NBA draft stuff and they wanted like specific things.
That's right. Going very deep as it works. And that's what they're doing with ESPN Plus right now, right? Yeah. Because the ESPN Plus, they're never going to take, listen, your interview yesterday was fantastic with Bob Iger, but they're never going to take the big stuff away from ESPN. ESPN still makes a ton of money. And also it makes a lot of sense. Like being live, advertising, like sports is going to be the very last thing to go to a subscription model. But all the other sports that like a few thousand people care about, Like there's literally no time for that on ESPN. Like they're gated. There's 24 hours in the day, right? And so all that sort of stuff is a huge opportunity. Actually, I think one of the biggest missed opportunities that people don't think about for ESPN is ESPN was pretty early to soccer. And they should have locked up the Premier League like a decade ago. Like if they owned Premier League and had on ESPN Plus, like imagine how huge that would be right now. And that was, I think, a big missed opportunity in part because I really admire what Disney's done a lot in the last 4 years.